I'm Amy at EuroluxHome.com. Welcome back to our series on the historical overview of styles of European antique furniture. If you have been enjoying this series, please remember to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and maybe even share it with a friend who might also enjoy learning about antiques. So today we're talking about the Louis XV style, also known as the Rococo style. And behind me is a late 19th century Louis XV or Rococo style buffet. But in order for you to really understand the Louis XV or the Rococo style, we have to turn back and look at the Baroque style. And I have to throw in my favorite art history joke. If it's not Baroque, don't fix it. So we have a big long span of time. It started in Italy, just much like the Renaissance style did, and then it spread throughout the rest of Europe. And the Baroque style had a profound impact on art, architecture, and the decorative arts, such as furniture. So, what is the Baroque style? The characteristics of the Baroque style are grandeur, are elaborate ornamentation, great big huge works. They often will have a very strong emotional intensity to them. There's a sense of drama or theatricality to Baroque works. And we also have a sense of dynamic motion. Now, artists that you might be familiar with are Caravaggio, Gentileschi, or Bernini, great artists of the Baroque style. So, what is causing this great big huge expressive style, this Baroque style? So we turn and look at what's happening in society, because the art is always a reflection of what's happening in society. So if we look back toward the end of the Renaissance, we see the beginning of the scientific revolution. And that happens between the 16th and 17th century. And you really have a profound shift in understanding of man's place in the world. Previously, there had been the idea of a geocentric universe, which means Earth is at the center of the universe, and everything revolves around the Earth. Now, as part of the scientific revolution, we have scholars such as Copernicus and Kepler and Galileo, and they are all showing that in fact we have a heliocentric universe, or that all the Earth and all the planets go around the sun. So this changes man's idea of his place in space. And suddenly we have this sense of expanding space, of that we're not right at the middle of the universe, but that we're just one of the planets going around the sun. And so this idea of expanding space and dynamic motion becomes part of the Baroque style. Now we also have religious turmoil happening. You may have heard of a man by the name of Martin Luther, who back in 1517 nailed his 95 Theses to the door of the Wittenberg Cathedral in Germany and started the Protestant Reformation. The Protestant Reformation was a turning away from the Catholic Church of believing that man could directly access God, and it was directly questioning the power and authority of the Catholic Church, of the Catholic Church's ability to be an intermediary between man and God. So you have a lot of religious turmoil going on now with the Protestant Reformation, and by the 17th century you have what's called the counter-Catholic Reformation. So the Catholic Church is now coming out to stamp out this Protestant Reformation that has gotten away, and to reassert its power and authority through art. So art and architecture becomes sort of marketing, in a sense, to show the power of the Catholic Church. A great example is Bernini's Baldacchino. It has just spiraling motion, this idea of dynamic motion, and it's gigantic. It's a canopy that's inside the Vatican, and it really is meant to, when you walk into the Vatican, you are dwarfed in size by the Baldacchino. So this gives you an idea of what's happening in society, but we also have the rise of absolute monarchies on a political basis. And the prime example that you may have heard of is Louis XIV. Now, Louis XIV was considered the Sun King, and he famously said, "I am the state." And so everything in France revolved around Louis XIV. And he had a great impact, of course, on the Baroque style. This grandeur, this huge, overwhelming size. If you have ever been to Versailles, you may have walked through the Hall of Mirrors and seen the elaborate ornamentation. And it's meant to just evoke this huge scale, overwhelming sense of drama and theater and emotion. And so that is the Louis XIV style, the Baroque style. But you had to sort of understand all of that to then know what had been happening when Louis XV came to the throne. So his great-grandfather, Louis XIV, thought that he had the House of Bourbon very well protected. He had 6 male heirs, a son, 3 grandsons, and 2 great-grandsons, so nothing to worry about, right? Well, believe it or not, within a span of 3 years, 4 of those heirs died, and the 5th one renounced the throne of France in order to become Philip V of Spain, leaving poor little Louis XV at just 4 years old to inherit the throne of France. And at 13 years old, he began to rule. So imagine if you are just 13 years old and suddenly become king of France, what kind of style would you be interested in? Probably even more glorious and grandiose. Now, Louis XV, throughout his reign, was called Louis the Well-Loved. And it wasn't so much because he was so popular, but actually because he had so many scandalous relationships. He had quite a few mistresses, and the most famous of all was Madame du Pompadour. And she was a very amazing character, had a profound impact on the development of the Baroque style. And in fact, she is the one that's most closely linked to the Rococo style. So she was a very powerful woman. She exerted a lot of power in court. She was very well educated, and she was friends with some of the Enlightenment scholars, such as Voltaire. And she was a great patron of the arts, and her really decorative taste is what is now known as the Louis XV style, because in a sense she co-ruled with him. Even though Louis XV did have a wife, Madame de Pompadour was really the most famous woman in court. So the hallmarks of the Rococo style. And how do we get the term Rococo from Baroque? Well, there are 2 French words that mean shells and rocks, and there's the thought that these French words were combined with the Italian word barocco to form the new style, or Rococo, which is even fancier than the Louis XIV style. If you have ever heard the expression less is more, well, in the Louis XV style, more is more. And so we will go now and look at some hallmarks of the style and look at examples so that you can get a better understanding of the Rococo or the Louis XV style. So all of this history, I believe, is necessary for you to have a better understanding of the Louis XV style or the Rococo style. So we talked about in the Baroque time that the scientific revolution was happening, and we had a sense of expanding space with dynamic motion. We have the Catholic Counter-Reformation asserting itself, showing grandeur and authority through art. And we have this sense of the establishment of the French king as almost being like a god. And so in the Louis XV style, we do find great big pieces. Now, In general, it's thought the Louis XV style pieces are a little smaller than the great big huge grandiose Louis XIV style pieces, but this is still a great big, this is a late 19th century Rococo or Louis XV style piece. Still nice and big. And we do have a switch to using more exotic woods such as rosewood or walnut. This is a walnut piece behind me. And often you see the use of white marble on nightstands or vanity tables or even little accent tables. But one of the true hallmarks of the Louis XV style are curves. And this idea of curves, I think, expresses this idea of movement and expanding space. So we have a curvy top around the corner. It's not a sharp corner, it's a curvy corner. And we have a great big carving up at the top of a shell motif. And that is one of the hallmarks are the shell or roses and leaves. We have lots of carvings of natural motifs, shells, leaves, flowers, especially roses. And the Louis XV style is known for the cabriole leg. What's a cabriole leg? We have an example right here. It's like an S curve where it indents here at the ankle and curves out, and we have this nice rounded knee. And here we even have carved roses on the cabriole leg. Now, the Bombay shape became prominent during this time. And Bombay means it's a curve. So you can see that this piece is not just flat like we saw in many of the Renaissance pieces, but it actually has this swooping curve to it. Even look at the skirt. You can see this swooping curve, and then we have our little curvy cabriole leg. We have lots of carved details. And we do have a sense of asymmetry to the Louis XV style. Maybe this piece is a little harder to see, so we'll step back to this piece. Again, great big size. It's carved in walnut. We have lots of curves. Look at this big swooping curve along the top, the curves around the mirrors. We do have our cabriole leg, are carved with shells and all kinds of flourishes. But then if you look right here, this is actually an asymmetrical shape. It's not a circle, it's not a rectangle, it's asymmetrical. And I'll point out other examples on other pieces. So let's come over here. We'll look at this beautiful curvy Louis XV or Rococo style bed. We have right here at the top our big carvings. We have an S curve. Sometimes it's called a C curve. We have carved roses. You can get really this sense of movement, of swoops and swirls, of curves. Here's our Bombay shape. So that's not a flat carving. It actually has a curve to it. And we have our beautiful carved roses. Look down here at our headboard. Look at these curves, these swoopy curves. Again, these swoops and swirls, very different from our rectilinear geometric shapes that we saw in the Renaissance. We have a cabriole leg here, so I'll just show you that. And then here is another example of an asymmetrical shape. So what is this shape? It's not a square, it's not a rectangle, and it has that Bombay curve to it too. So curvy, just really beautiful. And all of these carved roses were supposedly the favorite of Madame de Pompadour. So if we look at these two chairs and look at them together, I think there you really can see this asymmetry. See the carving from one side to the other, and then this swoopy shape. The arms are nice and curved, a pair of really pretty Rococo style armchairs. And we do have the cabriole legs. So we'll look at a few more. We'll come around here. So right through here. So coming back to this piece, great big scale. We've got that beautiful S curve. We have the swoops and the swirls. The carved roses are just dripping down. This is a really nice mahogany piece. And we have flowers carved everywhere. We have these sort of asymmetrical shapes. We have these little swoops in the window panes, and our cabriole leg, and all of the carvings, the natural carvings. If we come over to this one, here's a great example again of our cabriole leg, that big S curve with that curvy foot. And here on the edge, we have a shell and we have roses. So it really shows you an example of the style. Here in the middle, we have all kinds of swirls and carvings. We have a little ribbon kind of flapping in the wind. And this one's sort of interesting because it actually imposes the C curve on top of sort of a stylized pediment. So a bit of a nod back to the classical forms, but a reinterpretation, which is what the Rococo style is. So lots of curves, lots of carved roses and flowers. So when you are out antiquing and you see a piece like this with all of these curves and our cabriole leg, you could probably sleuth and put it all together and figure out that it's a Louis XV or Rococo style. So if you have enjoyed learning about the Rococo style, please remember to like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. It really helps a small business. See you next time.